Yes, you are. Great. Okay, so we'll move on to our next speaker, and they will be presenting on applying constructivism in neurodiverse classrooms. All right, feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Hello, so today I'll be presenting research on applying constructivism in neurodiverse classrooms, and this is empirical research conducted on research previously conducted by other people. I personally did not conduct any empirical research myself. I just did journal research and looked into more educational journals and papers to kind of craft this paper from those previous terms that were done. So first with the introduction, the traditional approach to a child struggling academically, whether or not they were diagnosed previously with a learning disability or disorder, was to classify them as quote unquote limited intelligence and placing them in a special needs classroom under the presumption that they would hold back the rest of the classroom in a normal setting. However, recently with a more progressive approach, there was an approach to integrate students into the normal classroom and recognize them as equally valuable and beneficial to a diverse classroom environment. And by acknowledging their different methods of learning, as well as their unique circumstances that can be surmounted with accommodations and support, this will lead to greater diversity in the classroom and allow for students to learn not just from their teachers, but also from their peers with different experiences. So overall, this paper will discuss constructivism, cognitive load theory, and assistive technology, with constructivism and cognitive load theory being cognitive development theories for children and education, and assistive technologies being utilized to perhaps help these neurodiverse children when they're through their learning. So to begin, I'll give an overview on constructivism, cognitive load theory, and the zone of proximal development, which may not make much sense right now, but I will explain them as we go. So first with cognitive load theory, it asserts that cognitive functions such as short-term and long-term memory are integral components to be considered in instructional design. And it argues that while biologically primary knowledge, such as language skills, are naturally required, biologically secondary knowledge is acquired through problem solving, reading, listening, and researching. And this includes things such as mathematics and writing. And so the cognitive load theory asserts that information goes from short-term memory, also known as working memory, which has limited capacity and duration, to long-term memory, which has greater capacity. And this process of going from short-term memory to long-term memory is seen as extremely important in learning. And so one a method that cognitive load theory uses to teach children is the worked example effect, which encourages showing a learner an exemplary representation of the completed work before asking them to carry out the assigned task. And it argues that this lessens the workload of the short-term or working memory because it eliminates alternative actions that are possible. So for example, if a student is writing an essay, if they are given an exemplary example, they don't have to consider the multitude of different ways that they could be writing this essay because they are being shown an exemplar. So there are many criticisms of the cognitive load theory, particularly because it is criticized as ineffective in teaching students to self-monitor or self-regulate their learning. And some theorists believe that self-regulation should be cultivated in a learning environment in which the student has more autonomy and is encouraged to be more proactive in acquiring their own knowledge rather than the teacher being the instructor and showing all the methods that they can be using in their learning instead of the students figuring it out themselves. And so they argue that self-generated thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can be channeled to attain desired goals by the students themselves. The criticisms of the cognitive load theory say that this can increase self-satisfaction and long-term motivation if the students are able to find this for themselves. So because of these criticisms, there was another approach called constructivism that was first developed by Jean Piaget, a psychologist, and constructivism approaches recognize the interplay of the individual with his or her environment. And so Piaget's theories, especially those related to early years of development are still used today, such as the idea that neurotypical children, who are children without clear developmental disorders or drawbacks, grow and they reach certain milestones at certain ages. And so these milestones are used as steps to recognize what milestones neurodiverse students may need to reach as well. So constructivism usually calls for more group work as students are encouraged to critique each other's ideas and answers. And so this clearly shows more the students being able to utilize their own learning and kind of facilitate their own learning. And so research shows that constructivism promotes creativity and engagement in students, although different contextual factors also have to be um, considered as well. So furthermore, there is the zone of proximal development. And Lev Vygotsky was a psychologist who was a contemporary of Jean Piaget, and he classified all tasks into three categories: those we can do by ourselves, those we can do with guidance, and those we cannot do at all. And so Vygotsky argued that the focus of learning should fall within the second category, those we can do with guidance, so that students can attempt to do things that they don't necessarily know how, they don't necessarily have mastered yet, but they can do with the guidance of a facilitator, such as a teacher. So the second category is often referred to as the zone of proximal development, which is the gap between someone's actual level of development and someone's potential for development. And so Vygotsky's belief was that the potential for development and not a simple evaluation of the completion of the task was crucial for cognitive development. And a related theory is scaffolding, which is that interactive instructional relationships between teachers and students enable students to solve problems beyond their unassisted efforts, which is similar to the theory of the zone of proximal development. And through scaffolding, students learn new skills, concepts, or levels of understanding, which culminates in completing a task successfully and ultimately reaching autonomy. And this theory of scaffolding is crucial to the constructivist theory because this is one of the main theories that it applies. And so, constructivism in neurodiverse classrooms. So the benefits to constructivism is that it prioritizes student-dominated learning and interaction, as mentioned before. However, teachers still do play a critical role as facilitators rather than knowledge transfers. So teachers can show students scaffolding techniques that they can use to connect their past experiences and the new information that they are provided, which can strengthen their knowledge with more student autonomy. And so constructivism is based on the idea that everyone, whether neurotypical or special needs, learns differently, and that these needs can be acknowledged through constructivism, acknowledging that students can have more autonomy in the learning process so that they can build their own ideas and learn in their own ways. However, there are some criticisms about constructivism, especially that it does require more training for teachers as well to recognize that these students all have different needs of instruction and methods of learning. So the teachers do need to play a role as facilitators and kind of ensure that all their students are not falling behind. And so, in relation to the students not falling behind, the Every Student Succeeds Act was passed in 2015 and replaced the No Child Left Behind Act. And so this was passed because the Every Student Succeeds Act applies a more constructivist approach to both assessment and instructional design, because constructivism argues that students with neurological based behavior disorders such as ADHD, bipolar disorder, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder can pace the lessons themselves and still learn alongside their peers if given the appropriate help. So this also leads into the assistive technologies that can be utilized by these students. And so neurodiversity and education is important to recognize here, because neurodiversity in general is recognized as the diverse neurological or cognitive variations among individuals. And so this was first established through people with autism spectrum disorder, but has expanded to acknowledge all people with different neurological or cognitive disorders. And so advocates of the utilization of the word neurodiversity have promoted the position that neurotypical children, who are children without clear developmental disorders or drawbacks, benefit from the diverse interactions that they can have with neurodivergent students, which could ultimately reduce prejudice and preconceived misperceptions. And so this shows the importance of integrating diverse people in both the classroom and society. But because neurodiverse students do need to have certain needs recognized, this shows the importance of assistive technologies, which we'll discuss later. And so children with learning disabilities such as ADHD or other executive function disorders may struggle to utilize working memory, which we mentioned before is the ability to transfer information from short-term memory to long-term memory. And so this ability to use working memory is especially important for younger kids because working memory is needed when performing tasks such as mental math and physical tasks, because mental math requires a student to look at information that they have learned beforehand, such as numbers and the process of addition, and then utilize it to this new situation or problem that they have. And physical tasks, because working memory allows students to recall information about how they were told to complete a certain set of steps or the methods that they learned beforehand. And so working memory can be a set of difficulties for neurodiverse students, but many disorders also bring strengths as well as weaknesses. So because neurodiverse students have such a unique set of circumstances, a full evaluation of their mental capacities and processes is also needed. And so this also connects to the implications for using assistive technologies. And so assistive technology is any device, item, or piece of equipment that improves the quote unquote functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. And so in order to manage tasks and goal-directed activities, students need to have a wide range of executive skills, which can be improved with assistive technology when they struggle with this. And so some examples are not that complex. Apps such as Smart Pen and Audio Note help students understand and monitor their thinking, such as kids who struggle with writing or even just transferring the words in their brain to words that they can say. So these can help with monitoring thinking. And then there's a multitude of different technologies that can help students with time management, following a schedule, or just smoothly transitioning from one situation to another. Because, for example, students with autism spectrum disorder or ADHD can struggle with removing themselves from a certain situation and moving on to the next task. And the know what learn process, which has students write down what they know, what they want to learn, and what they will learn today, helps jog their working memory. And although assistive technologies can be important in the classroom, the importance of teachers still needs to be recognized because overall students also need social and emotional support in addition to the learning that the teachers help facilitate. So the teachers do still play a crucial role in the classroom, just not as information transfers, but as facilitators of learning. And so in conclusion, the appreciation for learning through constructivism has encouraged new perspectives. And so in the past, cognitive load theory may have been recognized as students simply absorb information and teachers give the information in one rigid process and not recognizing the diverse needs of students. And so constructivism's more pedagogical approach can be more beneficial to neurodiverse students. And so this quote unquote paradigm shift that can occur when constructivism begins to become applied to classrooms can help change the structure of classrooms. And one important thing to recognize about constructivism is that it's not a set of teaching principles, and it cannot just be applied as one classroom set of rules. So constructivism is merely a theory that encourages teachers to be facilitators of learning and students to have more autonomy in their learning. So if constructivism is applied and there is a more solid set of rules that can be established to help teachers and schools institute constructivism, this can also help the development of constructivism later on. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I hope we have some questions from the audience. You answered many of the questions I had along the way. I was kind of curious about some of the more, maybe practical, solutions to this problem that you've highlighted in terms of, kind of failing to meet the needs of a neurodiverse classroom, right? And you gave some great tips at the end there. So you've already answered my question. I'm wondering if anybody else has some questions in the audience. Let's see. Yes, we have one. Oh, wait. Nope, sorry. That was from the last talk. Oh, here we go. When you mention technologies, it made me wonder if our expanded access to resources through the internet could also play a role in the constructivism approach.
Yeah, definitely. Because there are a ton of technologies that can be used not through, for example, like audio note or smart pen, like that has to be a pen that a student has in real life. But for example, like on the internet, there's free resources such as Khan Academy, which is actually really helpful for students with, for example, dyslexia because of the contrasting background that a lot of the instructional videos have on that platform. So these kind of internet resources can also be really helpful as well.
All right, we have another question. Can constructivist approaches also apply to people on the other end of the spectrum who feel advanced compared to their available classes?
Yeah, definitely, because constructivism encourages students to go at their own pace. And if, as you mentioned, that means that a student feels more advanced, then perhaps the teacher can facilitate that student's specific learning needs and ensure that those needs are met by maybe like giving them extra resources in that aspect rather than assistive technologies. They can have more advanced like tasks that they need to complete that are meeting their needs and their level. So yeah, approach can definitely apply to that aspect as well.
Um, how can we balance working with students almost at an individual level?
So that is one drawback to constructivism because teachers do need to kind of accommodate for the needs of individual students rather than just standing in front of the classroom and saying the same thing to everybody. So that is one difficulty that teachers might face when applying constructivism to their classrooms. But I think that if teachers are able to just, um, I guess, instruct on a more personal level and know the needs of the students, then they can kind of try to balance, like, not like one having one teacher like focus on one student specifically every single day, like knowing them like in terms of like their specific drawbacks or disorders, but just in general, if they're able to acknowledge that every student has different needs and every student goes at their own pace, then I think this can be balanced as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I'm not as familiar with the Every Student Succeeds Act, but I was curious, scaffolding is a pretty common topic in education in terms of providing resources for students at different levels. Um, Maybe you're aware, or maybe you're not aware, are there any particular policies within the Every Student Succeeds Act that maybe would support teachers and make it easier for them to provide scaffolding, given, all of these time constraints and it is very challenging to work with students at an almost individual level in a classroom setting.
Mhm. So there is uh, in the every every student succeeds at it says that each student needs an quote unquote IEP, which is like an individualized education plan, um, which this allows to the teachers to kind of determine whether when a student with, like, for example, a significant cognitive disability should be evaluated under like alternative assessment or things like that. So there are like some legal guidelines that might help teachers kind of like establish ground rules and like kind of where the kind of structure that they should take when regarding like testing, for example. But I'm not entirely sure if there's one that's regarding like specific, like how this can be applied to the classroom, because like I said, constructivism is just still in its rudimentary state of being like a theory rather than a set of like principles.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much, Soyun, and yeah, thank you for sharing your work with us today.
Thank
We
you.
will go